What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam gaming, tabletop, all that good stuff. I am Steven, your host, and joining me is the fellow freshly shorn Adam Blue. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm glad that our calendars synced up and we knew at the same time we were gonna get our hairs done.
Yeah,
Um,
you know,
no, I think it was just yeah, coincidence. We'd both just kind of been letting our hair go.
yeah. It was a rough winter, and I think that now we have, what is it? Blossomed into butterflies, whatever the case may
Oh
be.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's some.
exactly.
We were in our what the cocoon,
Oh
whatever,
yeah, the
pupa
cocoon, right.
stage, whatever that,
There's a thing about your wings or whatever
I don't know.
folding, showing something.
I'll leave
But
you
you
guys to
Hey, you wear yours good though, I gotta say. I mean,
oh, thank you.
mine, for me, it was the shock of cutting the hair, but I've still got this weird, like I was saying, kid and play flat top going on. It's a little too much at the top. And
It's
being
just all that
a
volume.
being yeah, and being a vain content creator, always looking at myself on video, it's like, yeah, I gotta work on, but
Gotta tighten
I'm
that
getting
up. Yeah, the
hey, our shirts are what actually make us look good, so
that's exactly right. You gotta always represent merch. Speaking of which, if you guys have not caught Adam the Explainer's recent video that dropped this morning, great fashion sense in that video, I've got to
oh, yeah.
say. But it's also one of my favorite formats that you've done so far, so I hope that it's
Thank
something
you.
you do again going forward. You walked through the sort of development timeline of the Pale Rider line of mobile suits. It was pretty awesome to see, and yeah, if you guys haven't checked it out, obviously at the end after this,
Yeah, afterwards.
go
It'll
check
be
it out.
there.
But
No,
yeah,
but I appreciate it, because I w it the video is something I am trying to do. I'm not there yet, but this is the first step to having the content be more based around strict, like, here's an idea and I'm gonna make it mine. And then having that deck then available for supporters if they want to be able to download and have for reference the
yeah,
pictures and text and the sources. I I think sometimes that could be helpful to look at something, but yeah.
yeah. That was man, I've been doing a bunch of Gundam research as part of like the Dissecting Gundam series, and as obviously the wiki's not a great place to look. Which I always go back to that Henry Cavill clip where he's like, Wikipedia, you're using Wikipedia as your source of information. Um, and so yeah, I'm like, okay. There was actually a website. I think it's Mecha Bay that was launched in like 2009. A couple guys that were contributors to the wiki wanted a more authoritative resource when it comes to Gundam lore, and that kind of fell off. Like they haven't kept up with
Mm.
it nearly as well. There's got to be a way, and I've had conversations with people on Twitter. Like, there's got to be like a format where people can submit information, but they cite their sources the way that you have, and like, you know, we
Wouldn't something like the way GitHub works,
yeah,
like, I feel like that could be it because it's
that's
almost like this kind of communal sort of authoritative, and then people can contribute and then discuss it in a yeah, it's funny how in GitHub how that is. I
yeah.
mean, because a lot of it is very serious business if you think about it.
Oh,
It's not just
absolutely.
like mech stats, it's like, here's the code that can operate a power station somewhere. I don't know, but yeah, something like a GitHub, yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that was source control. That's the
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but yeah, I see we've got the chat is already popping. Ultronymous, Robert, Gundam Wing, Tony Reyes, um I see Ultronymous is saying Kid and Play is dope though, and I agree.
Yeah.
Bring back those 90s icons.
Okay, but they did.
Oh yeah?
So, I don't know if it's out yet or it's gonna be out, but it's a Kid and Play movie. I just remember seeing, like, they showed the actors and whatever. I haven't s so I don't know.
This is news
It's
to
it's
me.
different actors, so I don't know if they're doing the
Interest.
thing like Fresh Prince where they kinda just redo it for a new time, but then no one kinda cares. That I mean, no offense to the creators because it seems neat. It's just I think people have moved on from certain scenarios. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my wife just brought up the fact to me that they're remaking White Men Can't Jump.
Oh,
Um,
I thought the trailer looked good though.
That's what she said. She was like,
Okay,
she was like,
cool.
it looks good, but can we just stop remaking things?" Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
but
I get it.
oh, Zeonic Shadow in the chat. Yes, thank you. I need to update my Zeonic Shadow merch collection, so I might do that here after the stream. But first, we have some arguing to do, which is I think what Gundam fans are best at.
Oh, yeah,
um, so
totally.
last week, let me pop this up on screen here. Last week, I popped the question on Discord. Hot topic debate time. Which did more damage to the established 1 Year War timeline? Origin or Thunderbolt? Um, now I'm not even sure how this came up. It was just one of those things where I was like, huh, people are arguing a lot about like canon and
Yeah,
we touched last week. You mentioned how in Japan canon's not really a thing. Like
right.
that you have these loose affiliations. So as far as Japanese audience is concerned, they don't necessarily care about Origin and Thunderbolt getting in the way of canon. Uh,
Yeah,
but for us over here in the West, this is a major point of contention. So I put this question out on Discord and got some amazing responses. I've got a few of them here that I'm going to highlight. I've obviously redacted the names, so no dog piling. But if you are in the chat and you recognize your comment, feel free to say like, "Hey, it me," and take credit for appearing here. But yeah,
yeah,
hopefully Adam and I are going to sort of argue. Well, first of all, let's hear your opinion, Adam, because I know where I stand on this.
yeah.
Which do you feel did more damage to the 1 Year War timeline?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and I feel like I could answer what you're saying within 60 minutes, so I'll try to slim it down to 60 seconds, but I would say it's interesting, context, damage, and it's like what changed things up to make people go, "Okay, that doesn't fit." Like the whole, what's that whole thing called where they make a CGI model of someone and you look at it and it's like,
Oh, the Uncanny Valley.
yeah, it's almost like an uncanny valley thing that occurs because 'cause you're like, "Well, what am I looking at?" And so that was kind of the thing with Origin because, like, when I was getting into Gundam, then watching the Origin, I would see things and I would make videos about history, realizing, "Oh, that's like an alternate version of what I base all my love of in this 0079." Thunderbolt, and here's the delineation I wanna make too, is there's the manga and there's the anime. Now in Japan, officially, they recognize all animation is in the same continuity, but the mangas aren't. And if you look at like a Thunderbolt manga, I think that does more damage than Origin. But in terms of animation, I think Origin does more. But at the end of the day, and I would like to see if you or chat can bring this up. There doesn't seem to be any plot points from Thunderbolt or Origin that negate things moving forward. In fact, I think the canon new translation is actually what then negates a lot of what happens afterwards. But I know that's not for today's
No, well,
discussion.
I mean, I think Pyro just mentioned it in chat that Zeta did more damage to the timeline than, which I think he was being a little bit of a troll there.
Yeah,
Uh,
but there's kind of a thing to
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Which yeah, that's a good point. The movie trilogies obviously make some changes to the timeline, and maybe damage is too aggressive of a term. Maybe I should rephrase it to something like which bends.
But it does good for the content.
Yeah, I just,
Put in damage, debate. Yeah.
ruined Gundam. Yeah, yeah, man,
So
like I
so did
miss
you
everyone
understand
was.
what I was saying then between Origin and Thunderbolt?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, and I think that that's a
Well,
good distinction to bring up, as
okay.
far as, like, manga versus anime, because
Yeah.
the anime, they definitely seemed to kind of scale back a lot of what they did in the manga that is just outright change things up,
Yeah.
and especially in the case of Origin, because Origin, we got a full 1 Year War manga, as opposed to the
That's right.
anime, which cuts off right before the 1 Year War starts.
Yeah.
So in the Origin manga, there is a lot that's different. And some of it better, some of it worse. I don't know. Like
Hmm.
personally, I love the Origin manga.
Yeah.
Um, but if I'm being honest with you, as much as I prefer Origin to Thunderbolts, like taste wise, like what I enjoy, I have
Mm.
to say that I think that Origin on the whole does more to mess up what we have established in 0079 than Thunderbolt. But my opinion doesn't matter. Let's go to the audience and see what they think.
Yeah, let's look at the hot takes.
So, up first, that's very difficult, which you can see I reacted with 100%. Absolutely, it's very
Yeah.
difficult. I really think that Origin fucked up quite a lot by introducing so many mechanics early, but not enough to the point where Thunderbolt has mass-produced units that don't exist for several years ahead of time. I'd say probably Thunderbolt, which is true. At the end of Thunderbolt, you see that they've gotten mass-produced Zeongs, which is not a thing. I guess what I would argue against this point would only be that in 0079, which I touched on this in my first Dissecting Gundam, or no, it was in the second episode of Dissecting Gundam. Amuro mentions that as he's destroying the components of the other Gundams that were on board White Base, that they actually had 3 Gundam units on board White Base.
Mm.
So the idea that there could have been a full armor Gundam shipped to Side 4 is not completely outside of the realm of possibility, because once you strip off all the extra armor and the sub arms and stuff, that full armor Gundam is basically an RX-78.
Yeah. That's I think, yeah, looking at those little tidbits, which you do bring up in your Dissecting Gundam. I love it. But yeah, those little tidbits do build out the lore of what could be happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love that little stuff, because it obviously swings the door wide open for these types of side stories and spin-offs, which is
Yeah.
something that you brought up today in your video. How those side stories help contribute and flesh out the world a little bit more without necessarily changing it.
Yeah.
Which, like for instance, the Marcosius team doesn't really change. Like the Blue Destiny story, the Pale
Right.
Rider story, those don't change anything about 1 Year War. Origin and Thunderbolt kind of do.
Yeah.
Up next, so in terms of mobile suit presence, it would be Origin. Gun tanks weren't a thing until well into the 1 Year War. True, I think that if the Gundam didn't appear until September 0079, the idea that they had gun tanks before kind of
Well, one thing I'll add to that is how do we know for sure that's true? Now,
well,
for Operation V, they
yeah,
had a gun tank, but that could have been the specialized gun tank for
that's
Operation V.
the gun tank, not
And there
like
could have been previous, versions. And I think that's where in at least the animation, the origin is open to interpret that, and it doesn't contradict anything in 0079.
that's true. And I think that the idea that the Federation had gun tanks kind of um well, it's one of those things about the Origin, right, is they had to create a scenario in which Xeon was on the back foot,
Yeah.
where Xeon was being oppressed by the Federation, because
Yeah,
that
showing those gun tanks in lines at their colony
yeah,
really does in multiple ways. It's tanks and not mobile suits. So tanks lend to that more real world thing we do see where tanks are going down streets. And I think it's almost like even if that is a retcon, I think that is a well done retcon because it shows a lot about the Federation.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's almost like a weird uh allegory analog to like Tiananmen Square. Like,
Oh yeah.
you've got gun tanks just bearing down on these Xeon protesters. This
Show
is of
their
course,
authority to
yeah,
the population. Yeah.
exactly.
Listen to
So
us. Yeah.
so yeah, very very cool. Yeah, very good observation there. I mean, the idea that a gun tank couldn't have existed prior to the 1 Year War, um, not necessarily ruining anything.
Yeah.
And if they were only deployed in space, if the Federation didn't have them on Earth, it's not like, you know, if let's say they have gun tanks in space, and they're using them to suppress the colony of Munzo, Side 3. If Xeon took over, then all those gun tanks went to Xeon. And if they
Yep.
didn't have any on Earth, then all they would have had were the Type 61 tanks that we see in the One Year War.
Which that's another thing I love about that, because in that storyline, Federation was there training the Xeon soldiers. Like, I
True.
love that aspect because it was like the Federation just thought so big of themselves that they're like, "Yeah, we can use this population as soldiers," but they were training the people to stand up against them.
I don't know any real world any real world governments that do anything like that. I this is all this is all
Again, that's why
speculation.
it's cool that they can double down on the one-year war storyline by showing real world things that occur to build up to that.
Yeah. And
It
not in a not even in a like hackneyed ham-fisted way where it's like,
Right.
you know, hey, look, this is that president you don't like. It's like
Yeah.
these are common things that have happened through in governments and in wars throughout history. These are things that they're like recurring tropes. They're almost like, you know,
Yeah. You know what? And that brings up something. Androius is saying this in chat. In the origin, Haro is a mass-produced toy instead of Amuro inventing it. No need for mental gymnastics to admit that origin is an alternate UC. Now, yeah, nothing about mental gymnastics here. And again, officially, the creators of the animation say that origin is part of all animation. It's part of that. It's just the manga that's alternate. But when it comes to that specific plot point about Amuro, and again, I want to add that, and I was telling you about in your last stream. So if people missed that one, the Resident Evil original George Romero Resident Evil guy that was making a documentary about it said when they were talking in Japan about the content of the story Resident Evil, they say in Japan, and it could be because of the cultural history that is much older than here in America, at least, of storytelling, where things can be different, and that's okay. That's to tell a point, to make a point about something. So for Haro, do they say in 0079 specifically he invented Haro, or is it that that is his custom Haro in a way?
so I'm glad you brought this up because it happens in episode 3 of 0079. Uh, Ryu and Amuro are just coming back from having fought Char,
Yeah.
and Haro comes out of Amuro's room and is, flapping his little his little wings, and he says, "Hey Amuro, good work, Amuro." And Ryu says to him, "Huh, that's interesting. What's that?" And Amuro says to him, "That's Haro. I invented him."
Now, could it be he invented the
That Haro?
character of Haro that then becomes the mass-produced version that then gets sold? Because isn't it where
Possibly.
even in the before Origin, the idea was Haros became mass-produced later anyway? And then I guess in Origin now is it, and I forget, but is it in the animation of Origin that they have mass-produced Haros?
I don't
Or
remember
is that just the
seeing
manga?
mass-produced Haros in Origin.
Yeah. So I
But
think
yeah, you're right. In Zeta, there's a little dialogue about like, Camille says, "Oh, this Haro is just a toy. It's a replica of the one that Amuro had."
yeah. So, yeah, I think from that, and that's a good point to bring up where the manga maybe said that it was mass-produced before the One-Year War, but in the animation, it doesn't contradict. And so that's what I look for. And I think it's fine too. Like through this exercise, I would love to find examples of direct contradictions in the animation. Just just so I know. And I'm always aware as I'm diving into lore and talking about it, I can be like, oh, that's a contradiction, but you know. Oh, and Joyce is saying Temre bought Amuro the Haro in the origin.
There it is.
So
Yeah, and
so
Webfox
the
says
head
it
canon,
has a Haro in the box.
yeah, the head canon could be he has the Haro, and then he, because of the type of guy he is at the beginning, he's, you know, fiddling around with his computer, he's making it his own custom Haro, and he becomes popular from the One-Year War. Then they start making these Amuro Haros.
Yeah. It,
So
it, it's like it's like the good guy dolls prior to prior to Child's Play when the
Oh,
good guy
yeah.
doll becomes Chucky.
Yep.
Um but yeah, and you know, you brought up Resident Evil as a good point of you know, canon not being a thing in Japan. Another huge example of that is The Legend of Zelda. Everyone's
Yeah.
always trying to figure out like where all of the Legend of Zelda games fit on some timeline, and they did establish a canon timeline, but they've changed it 3 times since then
Yeah.
because they, you know, it just doesn't matter.
Which, to be honest, that is cool. They're the source of authority, and as they're making the new games and making new ideas, I like the idea of going back and fleshing things out, just as long as it's not a Han shot first scenario where they change a drastic character,
Yeah. And I
part.
think that there are some people that would say that the character of Garma in particular is drastically changed by the origin compared to
You know, as for the animation, I couldn't see that, but maybe in the manga
yeah.
because I haven't finished it.
Um, but yeah, moving on to here we go. I like this comment because it gets real into the nitty gritty of the development trees, like I know you like. So I like the MSO6 variants, that's the Zaku 2s, but yeah, the whole idea behind the C is that it was an armored up variant designed to weather radiation that they got discarded after the Antarctic Treaty, so it's weird that they've gone so far into random variants for it. Could have just as easily been F types. The R types at Loom were bizarre also. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Zaku types, so in the Origin you have the Zaku Type C, which is like a heavily armored Zaku 2, which then their explanation is that that gets broken up into the F types and the J types. The J types being the space uh, specialized ones, and the F types being the ground types.
And then
Um, or maybe
and
I
I don't
have
know
that.
if no, you might
Sorry,
have
sorry.
this is that related to that is it a JC type that I'm thinking of, the ground '08 MS team?
Yeah, I think
Or is that
so.
a J?
So yeah, I might have them backwards.
Oh, okay. So the J is and the F is space, you're saying?
I think yeah, if
Okay. I don't
there's
know. I don't remember, so I'm just
well, and it you know, both unlike with the Dom versus the Rick Dom, both of them can operate um in either locale, whatever you want to call it, either environment,
uh-huh.
but they're optimized for one or the other. So like for
Ah.
instance, like the F becomes the F2, which is definitely more optimized for ground combat. The R types, of course, being the high mobility Zaku's, which we don't see those until well late into the 1 Year War. So it's weird that you have, you know, high mobility Zaku's prior to the 1 Year War.
Yeah. And they were even added in even more a different type of high mobility land type that's in Kukulsdoan's island, which we should get to that a little bit later because I think there was also some contradictions there, but not big contradictions, really. It's
It's a good
and
point.
um Shirtlad, good to see you. He was saying, okay, it is called JC, this other one I'm thinking of.
Okay.
So it's not a mix of the C type, it's just that other one. I guess that's in '08 MS team or something. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, but I can see how that would be confusing because it's like you have, you know, a
Yeah.
C type and then a JC type and then F type
Well,
F2.
and to add to this, when War in the Pocket came out and they had that Zaku Kai, that was supposed to just be the Zaku 2, just an updated version for 1989,
Yeah,
but they went back and retconned it as being just an alternate type. So it's just an example of how they think of continuity,
yeah,
and they did get to a point where they wanted to streamline it a bit and not make it too contradicting. So that's good to
yeah.
know.
Which is makes it even more fascinating that they've kind of backpedaled on that
Yeah.
now, since Thunderbolt and Origin happened way after 0080. You know, it's
Yeah,
like
and I wonder if it was like it's not War in the Pocket wasn't from Tomino, so I wonder if they were like, "Well, then we'll just make this kind of a" but maybe people loved it so much and it still had the themes of Gundam, maybe almost better than the others, that they just folded it in, and I think it's cool.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
agreed. So let's see what else we've got. So while the Thunderbolt had the massive things shouldn't have been made yet And the first OVA had the excuse of "fuck it, this is as good as a test bed as any for the mass production of gun cannons." Isn't a strange thing considering that Atabaoku had a good number of them. The grammar on this is a little a little tricky,
Yeah.
but Abaoku had a good number of them, meaning that they were able to get them. Maybe not with lunar titanium and Gundarium though. So yes,
Yeah.
it's true because at the end of 0079 they do have tons of gun cannons, so it's not unsurprising that they would have tons of gun cannons before, but
Yeah, and we see, like, especially in the video games when they're showing, like, the Battle of Baoku or Solomon, where you're seeing a whole bunch of different things out there in the mix because they're both at the end of the war throwing out all their prototypes and experimental units out or
yeah,
given aces specific unit types, and that almost kinda helps. And what's interesting too is, like, the Atlas, for instance, from to me, I thought, wow, that is almost too far-fetched of a suit for 0079. But then when I was reading more about it, it actually rolled out in 80.
yeah,
And this was after getting Zionic folded into Anaheim. They used the joint system on the Atlas. So so to me, then when I hear that, it's like, oh, then that's not too far-fetched that the Atlas showed up in 80
yeah.
at
Yeah,
all.
that's the other thing is, Thunderbolt definitely happens a little further down in 0079, or at least, the first half of Thunderbolt happens
Yeah,
in 0079 later than Origin, which kind of throws a whole lot more off as far
right.
as yeah. Let's see what else we've got here. So it is the same problem I've always had with UC. Excuse me. Nobody should have a problem with UC, no, especially UC from August onwards, where you've got variants being prototyped, mass produced, and becoming obsolete in the span of literal weeks. It's goofy. The 1 year war should have been 5 years long. Yes. This is one of the things that
Well,
this is one of my critiques, I think, of most Gundam side stories in general, is that we have like 95% of Universal Century side stories and supplemental content are all 1 year war, and you've got like nothing from from 0083 until Char's counterattack.
that is a good point. I will say that is a good point for what we are used to in terms of in our world,
Yeah,
but I then try to remind myself how far in the future it is, how
true.
much we know the military industrial complex really drives production in weaponizing, engineering. I it would to me, if that was to continue this trend, in that time period, I could see within 6 months all these prototype crazy weapons when they know it's working. It was like once Gundam was in the RX-78 too, they're like, "Okay, fast track everything. Fast
Yeah.
track everything. We're gonna."
I want Big
Yeah.
Zams, I want
Yeah.
Zacrellos, I want Big Bros, I want Grab Bros. Give me all of the mobile armors. I don't care what it takes. Yeah. Well, and
And
oh, go ahead.
that kind of lends to the fall of Xeon in general, I think, like, as much as the Earth Federation had all of these crazy prototype suits, they were almost streamlined in a way, and they were based off of other variants or led into variants, whereas Principality Xeon was going crazy with changing the literal construction of how they would do things in order to just have crazy weapons and
Yeah.
stuff, and that's part of their downfall. They didn't communicate as a family that was running a government. So even at a family level,
Which
and they
again, what real life families just don't talk to each other and
yeah, it's yeah, it's
uh but yeah, no, I mean that's a very good point. And I'm sure that Xeon was looking for that silver bullet, right? Because in the earliest episodes of 0079, Char is just blown away by the
right.
power of the Gundam, and he's like, this is a game changer for them, and we need something like this.
'Cause they thought they were at that end. They were like, "There's no way the Federation could have anything more than what we have with the Zaku too."
Yeah.
And yeah, they quickly beat them with the beam weaponry mainly being it, right?
Yeah, I
It
mean,
was
the beam weapons I
yeah,
think were the biggest thing. And again, that's something that I touch on in the dissecting series
yeah.
is I think that the original series failed to communicate just how insane beam weapons on a mobile suit were, because obviously you know, mega particle cannons, big part of the battleships. But when the first time that Xeon saw a beam saber, which was Amuro cutting that Zaku in
Yeah.
half, it's like that had to be like the first time that people saw gunpowder on a battlefield, and they're sitting there with their bows and arrows and crossbows, like, "Oh, I don't know what to do about that."
And it's telling how Shar reacted to what they reported to him. Like,
Yeah,
they were like, "Oh, no. We got our mobile suits destroyed. Oh, no. I'm sorry." And
yeah,
he's like, "No, obviously, this is a big deal. If they have this type of weaponry, we need to know this stuff." Like,
yeah,
really well played. You know, I wanna bring up some real quick. I saw Senior Antonio had a really good point, which could be
yeah,
the last thing we say. I don't believe Origin and TB ruined UC because 0079 gave us a narrow look of events, with Origin and TB help expand the world. I think that's a good way to look at it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, we touched on it earlier. Obviously, we're being a little facetious in saying that things are ruined, but that's the beauty of having these types of
Eh,
conversations, is that it's obviously emotions run high and people have their own head canon that we're trying to.
yeah, and I'm glad we're doing this, by the way. I love this discussion, but also it's to remind people, like, and to start, I think the Gundam subreddit is pretty good. There's not a lot of toxicity, at least I've come
I'm
across.
just playing with it.
But when people start like, "Oh, I just discovered Gundam, where should I start?" Or, "I just watched this, where should I start?" Or someone's like, "I just saw Thunderbolt, that was awesome." The replies I see all the time are people like, "Well, Thunderbolt and Origin aren't canon." Well,
Exactly.
they're not canon, so it's not a b but I feel like that shouldn't be communicated
Yeah.
at all. You should not tell people that they're not canon. Like, what are you trying to say? "Oh, it doesn't count? You shouldn't
Exactly.
watch it?"
Oh, is it not real? Is that just
Yeah,
not?
that when if you were to tell that to the creators of these animations, they would be pretty disappointed to hear someone is saying, no, they're not canon, they don't count." When in the creators' eyes, these Japanese creators,
Yeah.
those little details don't make or break a series. That's just to Westerners,
Right.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah, because everyone knows that the only thing that doesn't count are F91 and Crossbone.
Last words.
um,
No.
but so yeah, let's take a look at some other comments, because like I
Oh,
said, there are some. Oof, we've got some good ones here that I wanted to get to. Um, and yeah. Oh man, like I said, we could keep this debate going for months on end. But I think Androas brought up the best point. Is it's like, hey, you're gonna enjoy the anime a lot more if you don't if you don't try to make these
yeah,
things make sense in your head.
yeah.
So yeah, even though
Good
I
point.
actually like Origin and Thunderbolt, there are clear flaws in both, especially when it comes to continuity. However, I think both screw up continuity in ways entirely different, but just as exciting. That's what I want to take away from this. And we're going to get into that. When it comes to Origin, the biggest come from the form of mobile suit development and characters. While I don't outright hate these changes, except for what they did to my beloved gun cannon, it can't be ignored that completely changed the development tree of the Zaku.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Thunderbolt, there doesn't seem to be too much in terms of changes. Yeah, 3 extra Zeongs existing is R slurred, but
Mhm.
not something totally impossible. Where Thunderbolt becomes a continuity nightmare is with the world building, especially with Side 4, since Thunderbolt establishes a group that cleans up and repairs the entire colony, that in turn makes it impossible for the Delaz fleet to have taken shelter in Side 4, therefore pretty much creating a massive plot hole for 0083. Love the fact that we brought up 0083 and where that fits into the timeline. But it actually gets to imply that Side 4 was repaired by 80, which completely retcons the existence of the frontier sides, which were made from the remains of Side 4. F91 doesn't exist, Crossbone doesn't exist, Victory doesn't exist, which, I don't have a problem with
So now you
that.
kinda like this. Now you're on board.
Yeah, I'm vibing with this. But no, I think that yes, the first part of this comment, I love it because it touches on the difference between Thunderbolt strays from canon in terms of mechanical development, but because it doesn't touch any of the core characters from 0079, it really doesn't change canon much.
Right.
Whereas Origin, even in the animation, it fundamentally changes some of the characters and their motivations, right? Like, seeing young Rambaral and seeing young Dozel and seeing young Garma, characters whose personalities almost seem to change from, being like these sort of righteous good guys to then being these like violent bad guys. Um, it
Yeah,
just, it reminds me a lot, and you and I have talked about this before, of like, the differences between Solo and Han Solo in A New Hope.
right. Yeah, I and so one interesting thing about this, because I know you wanted to touch on 0083, when they're talking about a group in Thunderbolt cleans up and repairs the entire colony, is that in a manga?
Yeah, I think that
Because
that's
I don't.
from the end of the Thunderbolt manga.
Okay, yeah, because I don't remember that in the show. So again, I think this is where there is a delineation between animation and manga.
Yeah,
So, like, the interpretation of the manga is made to fit in with the animation. But with
yeah,
0083 then, like, there's even that Rebellion manga, which doesn't that even take a whole bunch of liberties anyway?
yeah, true.
Yeah.
Um,
So, I think more and more I'm seeing that the mangas do take a part of the story and then do its own thing with it. That's what it
true.
yeah, it seems to be, yeah.
Yeah, they take an idea and kind of run with it to its logical conclusion.
Yeah. Even if that contradicts other things in animation, but again, they're separate. So,
Yeah. Separate but awesome.
yeah.
Um, so this I just love this comment because it's like, I guess that's kind of my thing. I don't necessarily hate these shows in a vacuum. If only Origin existed, I'd be like, cool, fine. It's just when you try to cram it into existing canon, yes, I know there's no canon, which we've established. That's when things get wonkies. Like Thunderbolt is cool. I love it. And I suppose we should, preface that by saying it's like, I love 0079. I love Thunderbolt. I love Origin.
Yeah. All of those would be in my top 10 of
Yeah,
Gundam stuff.
they're all great.
Yeah.
Um, again, here we say I would say Origin personally. It fucks up the early war in so much, in my opinion. Love all the units, but why is there an Act Zaku in the early stages of the 1 Year War? And to me, Xeon should be winning by a landslide due to how early everything happens. Well, I mean, they are winning in a landslide for
But
the first 8 months.
yeah, but then the Gundam, and then that changes everything.
But then Gundam. But then Deus Ex Gundam.
Yeah.
Thunderbolt fucks up everything somewhat after the 1 Year War, while Origin just messes up everything before it. There you go. Um, and that's a good point that the Act Zaku is traditionally a late 1 Year War suit, because it was a means of updating the then underperforming Zaku 2s.
Mm,
There you go. So obviously we have had some great discussion here on the
yeah.
Discord, which if you're not a member of the Discord yet, why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hop in there so that we can have these types of debates
Yeah, it's
live.
for hot takes, flaming, whatever you need to do to get it off your chest.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, like we've said, this is just a fun discussion to have. It reminds me a lot of the kind of discussions I used to have back in the day with like comic books, like, oh, who would win in a fight, Hulk or Superman? And it's like,
Yeah.
you're never gonna see it. That's the whole point. You know that these things don't matter, but you're gonna argue about them anyway. We're
Yeah,
talking about a car. Ooh, what's that?
which no, which I find very interesting because think about the culture then of people discussing an IP in Japan versus people discussing an IP in the West. I'll just say specifically the US, where it's like people get mad over inconsistencies and start trolling. But it seems to be just such a regular part of storytelling in Japan. No one really cares, and people just enjoy the things they like. And I think that's something we could learn. For again, Japanese history goes back super, super, super far
Yeah,
because of the isolation, and I think there's a lot maybe Japanese culture is more mature with storytelling in general because they've had that tradition for so long, whereas The United States was established maybe more recently. American culture is more of a recent thing that's based
Yeah,
off of, I don't mean to get political, but based off of lies and murder. But at the same time, then how we've then grown up in the United States, we don't have that wealth of background information. In fact, a lot of what we're taught about is the the tribes around the world, the
true.
indigenous people around the world.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I brought this up a few weeks ago, where it's like people have been talking about like, oh well, Hollywood needs to get off the superhero kick and do some maybe like go back to doing westerns or doing Greek mythology, or like even dipping their toes into some Norse or African mythology. And I'm like, yeah, the United States is a young nation, but we have our own kind of mythology too, in those tall tales like Pecos Bill and John Henry. It's like I'd
Yeah.
love to see those types of stories get the Hollywood treatment. You know what I
That's a
mean?
good point. Even
Um,
how the Alamo turned out when we lost that, but that became a very interesting, honest story in a way.
yeah, yeah, and as a San Antonian myself,
Oh, yeah,
I
so you
I
appreciate
I am a
that.
big fan of the story of the Alamo. Um, but yeah, you're right. The United States is a young nation, and we don't have a rich history, especially an oral tradition history. Like almost all of our history is written down, which is very unique
Yeah,
among the countries of the world.
and when it's
Almost every
written
other country in the world has a rich oral
right.
storytelling tradition. So things like truth and canon matter more to us for sure.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, because a lot of the things we're having to reference, we're told to reference the history. This has
Yeah,
been written down. This was written down in the 1700s.
go write the
So
book. Go read the book.
yeah,
Like,
that reminds me because there was this. I don't know if you've heard of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. I've talked about it a lot. It's like a super ancient civilization area that kind of rewrites our history. But what happened was when they were doing some digging, they found a pillar that had a carving of an animal that has never been seen before, other than a local tradition of people getting tattoos of this animal. It's like a bird. It looked like a bird, but a specific shape that so when they found it in the ground, like, wow, so this tradition passed beyond when we thought civilization had started. And I mean, that's just interesting. Um,
yeah, I mean that's fascinating. And it's funny because the trope is always like the victors always kind of write the history,
yeah.
right? And I have to wonder, like, do you think that maybe throughout the history of the world that we're just batting 1,000 on the good guys always won?
Yeah, I
um,
know.
so
Uh,
it's an interesting thought to like maybe consider like what if the origin is just history written from the perspective of Xeon,
yeah.
or it's like we have these different sort of interpretations of events as they happened, and due to the sort of oral tradition of storytelling, we're getting two different sides of the story.
That's a really good point because if you think about it, there's a lot of little things that happen within the UC timeline that you would think need more explanation. They don't. But for instance, just like Zeonic folding into Anaheim, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah,
and then just even going further when in like Double Zeta, when you see what the Earth Federation is willing to do with Xeon, it's like, why would they make that choice knowing like they shouldn't be trusted? But it's this thing where in the background, there's always people controlling things that people don't really know why things are a certain way, but there's an agenda at the top. And yeah, that could then be why maybe stories are told a little differently, even if the outcomes are the same.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And again, at the end of the day, we're debating about a 45-year-old cartoon, but I think it's fun.
I think it's great. I was thinking about this the other day too. There was something specific that I was thinking about that had to do with, and I brought this up before, like enjoying Gundam. But, like,
Yep.
as much as, like, when I grew up, I thought Desert Storm was really cool and the Hot Wheels, like, there's something about loving these weapons that are designed on purpose to make money, to kill people. It's like, at least with Gundam, yeah, maybe it's designed to make money, but not kill people. To tell real
There you
stories,
go.
actually. You know, it that's what's interesting about Gundam is it's almost like it's telling us what's really happening in our world, but we aren't having to then put our money into supporting what's happening in the real world.
Hmm, that's an interesting take. I mean, I keep thinking like maybe maybe we need to recreate the meme is, instead of wow cool robot, it's like, you know, war is bad, but the point that we're missing is that canon doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Like the core thing that Tomino is trying to tell us is that, guys, canon doesn't matter. It's just
Yeah,
stops.
the canon doesn't matter, it's what's happening.
Right. Um
Yeah.
but let's see. Oh, here we go. Shirt Lad says, as I love to say from time to time, one man's dead horse is another man's pinata.
Oh, god. It's a good way to say it.
Yes,
That's funny.
exactly. See, and one man's Zeta Gundam is another man's G-Reco
You know
or
what?
IBO.
Yes, sir. Alternatus is saying something, maybe Alternatus, you can, let me know more about it later, but saying, kinda like how Macross has one of the movies be explained away as in universe propaganda. I like when things like that happen, so
That's
I
pretty
want
cool.
more info on that,
I
yeah.
mean, that kind of reminds me of Igloo, right? Because the whole idea of Igloo is that they're creating this like Xeon propaganda.
Exactly, and they even
Um,
show the videos as if you're someone watching the propaganda, yeah.
yeah, I would just love to see what what one of the things that I guess you never see from the Earth's perspective is like you don't get to see the so-called Earth's elite living as elite because it seems to me like in 0079 when they're on Earth, it's mostly under Xeon occupation and most of the people on Earth are kind of living in squalor and you don't see this like
Yeah,
it, there's this there's this idea among Xeon and among space noids in general where it's like, oh, everyone who lives on Earth, they must be rich and powerful. But then, like, every time we see Earth throughout the Universal Century, doesn't really seem that way.
the only time I remember was in Double Zeta when Judo's at that ball or that banquet or whatever, but that's
Yeah,
Xeon. And the other time was when he was in Ireland and he was, like, yelling at the Federation, leaders, but that was under the Federation doing nefarious things, and that's why he was yelling at them, so of course they're gonna be, there. So, yeah, you bring up a good point how it's it in wow, yeah, it's almost like it's not even really discussed, and it even gets worse as the timeline goes, where people on Earth is just bad. It's almost like Shar is right, but it's it's very interesting. It's very it's like it's propaganda in itself,
yeah.
because if you were to look at the everyday person on Earth, they're not living in a good environment,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, you look at the sort of suburbs at Side 7 or Green Noah, and they look nice. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not living in space, so I don't know the sort of complications or the downsides of living in space. But you compare that to like Quest Pariah hanging out with a bunch of hippies, like
Yeah.
running around in these like slums, and you're like, this is the daughter of a foreign dignitary,
Yeah.
and it just there's something strange going on, and I can't help but feel like there's this veneer of Federation superiority around the Earth, but then it really
Yeah.
is just kind of all fake.
And I think what it just boils down to is, I guess, Earth being a large mass compared to multiple colonies, and Earth, it's all connected, so it's easy for people on Earth to move resources around. Where in space, there's the colonies having to move from place to place. It's probably faster to get stuff done on Earth.
Yeah, interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I do like this comment from Shirt Lad when the live Zeke logo pops in, the Zuda pilot knows that he's in danger. Oh man.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, but yeah, no, good. At the end of the day, it's like I almost want to promote not not. I want to promote the idea of not telling people that, oh well, that's not canon, because
Right.
one, that's not the intention of it anyway, and the animation and manga are different. In
True.
the manga, expect wild, crazy things to happen within a story. In animation and video games too, and that's something. that they've even mentioned, the video games and the animations do follow a a through line, even if they do some things like I even brought up in my Pale Rider video. All of a sudden, there's this one-year war Red Rider, Black Rider, Rider, White Rider that have all these crazy things on them. It's like, did that really exist? But
Yeah.
I'm willing to go with it because it
Suspend
doesn't
disbelief.
change the story.
True.
Doesn't change the story.
Yeah. I mean, as long as they don't necessarily touch the main characters, the idea of like technology existing doesn't necessarily break my suspension of disbelief about these types of things.
Yeah, and it makes me think more too of like when I was getting into Gundam and realized there was these different Gundam, I'm like, why? What? That doesn't make sense. Waste of time. Wh- but that's a Gundam. Why would it be here? It's almost like someone in Japan watching Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and be like, wait, this doesn't, why would they, and then the White Ranger showing up in it when I think that was supposed to be part of a different Super Sentai. But you don't hear that. I bet in Japan, they probably just think, "Oh, a cool alternate version."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
more of that thing that I like.
Yeah, more of the thing that I like. Great simple sentence a toddler can say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and or, and this is I guess equally true on the other side is, hey, more of something that I don't like. It's like
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to consume every piece of Gundam media. Lord knows I don't. Um,
Yeah, and that's a good point you bring up too, because if you look at the last 2 major UC releases, it was Cuckoo's Doan's Island and Hathaway, which were both tonally completely different.
yeah,
Which was interesting. What was cool about Cuckoo's Doan's Island is there's nothing that happened in it that contradicts anything else. Even if I think some people say the timeline's off, like when they're at that island that it's supposed to that would happen afterwards in 0079 or after Jaburo instead of before Job or something like that, but
yeah,
that still doesn't change anything, you know? In fact, Slegger's character doesn't really do anything substantial to make it a huge contradiction.
that's true. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, Slegger would have been alive at that point because he doesn't die until they go back into space. So
Yeah.
it's not like it
Yeah, later on, yeah, that's
necessarily,
right.
you know,
So, yeah, and I think Gundam has taught me to appreciate that and not let it get to me. Just another factor of don't let judgment get the better of you of enjoying something,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. And it goes back to the point that you made last week where it's like, don't make statements, don't make statements of opinion as though they
Yeah,
are
oh,
fact,
yeah,
right? That
exactly. I
was,
think and I think about that a lot because I think people don't mean to do that,
no, it's,
but It but it's almost like that is a tool to be aware of,
yes,
opinion, to make sure you really are formulating the opinion and giving your personal reason because then someone might jive with that and be like, "Oh, yeah, I personally feel that way too." But, yeah, just stating something as a fact then gets people to go, "Well, that's not true. You're just" and then it's, back and forth, you know?
which, again, goes back to that idea of truth and like centralized information.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, that's right.
which again, like here we are making discoveries about human nature and the human experience all through the lens of Gundam.
Yeah,
It's,
I love it.
everyone wants to have like a centralized consolidated truth, which in some matters that you just, unless you were physically there, you
Yeah.
can't make
Yeah.
that distinction.
No.
um so
No, good point.
yeah,
Yeah.
all that is to say, I prefer to think of them as all pretty cool stories that happen in a roughly similar universe that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I'm gonna want more Thunderbolt. I'm gonna want more Origin, while I'm gonna want more UC like Hathaway, and that was part of that next 100 anyway, I think, where they're
yeah,
gonna continue that UC storyline, which you're gonna hate. I mean, they did this on purpose. Like
yeah,
Steven will hate this, but we're gonna do some crossbone and
yeah.
F91 stuff.
And God help us if we make it to victory.
Wow.
Oh, hey, Jamcal X, thank you for the super chat.
Oh yeah.
Just imagine all of these side story units being redesigned in classic 0079 Ver anime art style. It could
Oh
probably
yeah.
help reduce the mental struggle to connect the dots. That's actually a very good point. And
That is cool.
speaking of ver anime, I think that you would appreciate a you would appreciate the ver anime style robot spirits figure
Yeah.
of some of these suits.
Yeah, exactly. Like, even the Pale Rider line, yeah, there's so many that I see. Like, I saw a Zaku Mariner, and I was like, I would love to have a robot spirits of that. And in
Yeah.
fact, I got this out just recently because I'm gonna do a video about it, but the Zeta robot spirits, I think, is the best non-transformable version. But then I realized Zeta looks best when it has the wings out and up
Yeah,
like that.
isn't that interesting that it yeah. So it's funny you bring that up because I've been working on building my master
Oh,
grade
yeah.
not
The
Verka.
2.0?
This is where I'd put my Verka if I had one. Um but yeah, this is the master grade Zeta and I got to say I can't stand the proportions of it. It's a little too
Oh, okay.
sleek, a little too streamlined. So
It doesn't have a mechanical look? Do you think it's very, like, anime stylized?
no, I think it strays too far from the anime and looks
Oh.
more like a super robot that people would enjoy looking at.
Oh,
I
interesting.
tend to like things that are closer to the anime. So
Yeah.
again, Jam
Yeah.
Kyle X, thank you for the super chat because that is something that I think would definitely help with my what do you call that? When the with the mental gymnastics,
You
with
got it,
the
you got it. The
with
word's
this
there. No, but
lost it.
I mean, when I was talking about before how, like, I'll see
Cognitive dissonance.
design. Huh?
That's the cognitive dissonance that I've
Oh,
got going on with yeah.
no, I totally agree because when I'll see the different designs of the same suit, I'm like, "Well, why are there these different designs?" Even though that doesn't mean anything, but it's like sometimes I wanna get the version that just sticks to what is the intention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that I brought up with, Witch from Mercury is it's like, man, I love the way the suits look in the anime. Can't stand the way that the high grades look.
Yeah. Yeah. I
The
agree with that.
the anime, they look, chunkier, they look like big tough machines, and then the kits just kind of look like, you know
Dangly little plastic
yeah,
hollow
breaks my
sleeves. I
heart.
don't know how to explain it, but I know what you mean. The only thing I would say is the aerial itself does look better, than the Robot Spirits version.
Oh, yeah?
Um, but, like, I have the Nicholas, like, it's the most lame suit I think I've built. Like, there's nothing to it. It's that when that Gunvulva comes out,
Gun
that's I'm
Volva?
gonna get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons that I like the, Delanza so much is that the kit actually does look like it does in the show, which is
Yeah,
nice.
that's a good point, yeah. Well,
But yeah, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, fun, albeit frivolous debate about about canon and
it's a
the
good one.
existence or non-existence of it. I have fun with this type of stuff.
Same here, and for people that wanna get into Gundam, I think it's good to kinda get a baseline of how you can generally operate getting into the different offshoots,
Yeah.
without it really getting to you or not let it get to you. Yeah.
Definitely. And to those of you that do participate in the Reddit discussions, don't dog the new guy for getting into
Yeah.
Gundam because he watched Gundam Wing first. Just say, like,
Yeah.
"Hey, that's great. Either I love that series or I hate that series. The one I would recommend next is 0079."
Yeah. Which is what people tend to say,
Yeah, that's
so,
generally positive. But yeah, so hope you guys have enjoyed this discussion. Again,
yeah.
links down in the description to Adam's channel. Definitely go check out that Pale Rider video if you have not yet. We've got the Gundam Explained show tomorrow at
Mhm.
11 Central, 12
Yep.
Eastern. Do you have a little preview for us of what we're going to be talking about?
I do, and I'm actually just gonna throw this on you right now for tomorrow, but I wanna kinda compare the Zeta and the Double Zeta because I've been thinking about it a
Ooh,
lot. The suit itself, not the show, not the story,
okay.
but the suits themselves. I
I'm
think
gonna
they're
have
both
all of my
very
kits
cool.
out of each of them so that we can really.
Good, because I have mine sitting here too. Because yeah, they're very cool kits or suits, but they're very different.
They are for sure.
Yeah.
But But yes, thank you guys so much for tuning in today and for keeping the chat lively. Thank you for yeah, and I would expect no less with such a with such an
Cool group.
inflammatory topic.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
that's yeah, this is a good topic for
but yeah, no, thank you
yeah.
guys so much. I really appreciate it, and hope you guys have a good afternoon, great rest of your day. We will catch you tomorrow.
Yep, see y'all.
Cheers.